ISIS has claimed responsibility for that shooting that killed 50 people in Orlando Sunday, and it calls the shooter, Omar Mateen, quote, one of the caliphate's soldiers in America. President Obama called the brutal act an act of terrorism, but once again, he didn't use words jihad or Islamic State. Abigail Robertson brings us the story from Orlando.
Startling details continue to emerge as authorities investigate what motivated 29-year-old Omar Mateen to commit the deadliest shooting in American history.
This is an open investigation. We've reached no definitive judgment on the precise motivations of the killer. The FBI is appropriately investigating this as an act of terrorism.
Mateen's ex-wife describes him as abusive and bipolar and says she has had no contact with him for 7 years.
In the beginning, he was a normal being that cared about family, loved to joke, loved to have fun. But then a few months after we were married, I saw his instability and I saw that he was bipolar and he would get mad out of nowhere.
Mateen worked as a security guard at G4S, which describes itself as the leading U.S. security company. He legally purchased at least 2 firearms within the last week or so.
But it was at the moments when you would see his emotional instability and turning totally different.
The executive director of the Council on American Islamic Relations says Mateen does not represent the Muslim community in any way.
This is a hate crime, plain and simple. We condemn it in the strongest possible terms. It violates our principles as Americans and as Muslims. Let me be clear. We have no tolerance for extremism of any kind.
The FBI interviewed Mateen twice because of his ties with known terrorists, but didn't find him to be a threat. This American citizen, who pledged allegiance to ISIS, held clubgoers hostage for 3 hours until SWAT teams stormed the establishment. Up to 150,000 members of the LGBT community were said to be in Orlando in June for Gay Pride Month, one of the largest pride events in the world. The city had just wrapped up celebrations when terror struck the community a block away at Pulse nightclub. Around 300 patrons packed the club Saturday night, with almost a third falling victim to Mateen's bullets. Eyewitnesses recounted the terrifying scene.
And all of a sudden we heard like boom, boom, and we thought it was like the stereo. We were like, oh my goodness, is something going on with the, just the music. And after the second shot, there was a pause, and then it just started shooting, and that's when we knew something was wrong, when everybody just dropped to the ground, and then people started running.
Churches around Orlando are opening their doors for special services and vigils throughout the week, and worship bands like this one are heading to memorials near the scene to comfort and support the gathered mourners. Pulse nightclub is still an active crime scene, and as authorities work to clear the bodies, they can hear the sounds of victims' cell phones ringing as family and friends desperately try to locate their loved ones. Reporting from Orlando, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
This was a shocking situation, and joining us now from Washington is terror analyst Eric Stakelbeck. Eric, ISIS has called on Muslims in the West to carry out lone wolf attacks. Omar Mateen pledged allegiance to them. How deep is this kind of problem, this potential for problem here in the United States?
Terry, it is increasingly deep. Just listen to the FBI Director James Comey, who said a little while ago that in all 50 states we have investigations ongoing into ISIS-related activity right here in the United States. According to Director Comey, we have hundreds and hundreds of cases active right now that the FBI is investigating in the United States into ISIS-related activity, to the point, Terry, that the Bureau is overstretched. What we have here, and I don't use this word lightly, is an epidemic not only in America of this homegrown jihad movement, but in Europe, in the West in general, where you have citizens of the West, whether it's the U.S., Britain, France, Germany, pledging allegiance to ISIS. And a lot of times, Terry, they don't have to go to Syria or Iraq to train with ISIS. They are simply self-radicalized online. They get a hold of this ISIS propaganda, and it radicalizes them. And they do things like Omar Mateen did yesterday or the other day in Orlando. The big question here right now, Terry, I think is, okay, he pledged allegiance to ISIS. ISIS is claiming responsibility for this attack, but was it directed by ISIS? Did ISIS have direct contact with Omar Mateen? Did he have a handler who directed him to carry out this horrific massacre, jihadist massacre, Saturday night?
Well, I think one of the things that's troubling is the FBI talked to this guy. I mean, how do we move forward effectively in curtailing any of this activity if we interview and see no real potential problem?
Terry, that's a massive, massive problem. To me, that's disturbing because we had a similar situation in 2013. One of the Boston bombers had been questioned by the FBI. Then he was released, obviously goes on to carry out a horrific terrorist attack. Same deal here. And I wonder if political correctness, Terry, is infecting, it's obviously infecting high levels of the U.S. government right now, of Western governments, but you wonder at the Bureau, at the FBI, what are agents in terms of terror training, counterterrorism training? Our agents are doing a great job in terms of breaking up the plots. We've had great law enforcement intelligence work since 9/11, breaking up a lot of plots here in the U.S., but you wonder, do they understand the ideology? Because terrorism is only a tactic. It is driven by an ideology, and if you don't understand the ideology, maybe you will miss some of the warning signs when you're interviewing a terrorism suspect.
Well, let's say that this Mateen wasn't being driven directly by ISIS, that this was a just a lone wolf attack. How effective are these attacks?
Terry, very, very effective. You know, look at the track record. We have Fort Hood, we have Boston, we have other attacks here in the U.S., in the West. They do a few things for the ISIS propaganda machine. Number one, it affects a country's psyche. And imagine if you had these attacks carried out on a regular basis, could cause psychological damage in a country, economic damage, obviously, if you hit a shopping district, a hotel, an airport, so that's big. And for ISIS, look, Terry, they're losing some ground in Iraq and Syria right now, in their caliphate in the heart of the Middle East. So what they're going to do is look to lash out in other places, whether it's in Sinai or Libya, where they have strong affiliates, or especially here in the West, because to its followers, ISIS always has to maintain the impression that they have momentum. Yes, they've lost some ground in the Middle East, but hey, look, Paris, Brussels, San Bernardino, Orlando. So they may be losing ground in the caliphate, but they're still striking elsewhere. And that gives their followers, their admirers, the impression that, yes, ISIS still has momentum, and yes, ISIS is still on the rise.
Well, you talked about the ideology. This was an attack on a gay nightclub. So have Islamic jihadists long targeted gays for murder and torture? Will we see more of this?
Yeah, we don't hear a lot about this in the mainstream media, Terry, for some reason. But when it comes to homosexuals, gay community, look, not only ISIS and terror groups like Hamas in Gaza, the Taliban in Afghanistan, ISIS, of course, in their caliphate, but regimes, governments in Iran, Sudan, Saudi Arabia have long targeted homosexuals for torture and execution. So this is a long-running thing. If people are looking at the motivations for Omar Mateen, obviously it's Islamic jihadist ideology, and this anti-gay view is definitely a strong, strong part of it and always has been.
So, Eric, what's the best strategy for defeating them?
I think, number one, Terry, you have to hit them where they live and breathe. Look, ISIS has this caliphate, this Islamic State, in the heart of the Middle East. We know where their capital is, Raqqa in Syria. We know where they hide, where they live and breathe. I believe the U.S. military, a coalition, should smash, crush that caliphate. David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, has said the same thing. Tony Blair, the former British Prime Minister, has said the same thing. If you hit them where they live and breathe, if you destroy this caliphate they've established, the hope would be, Terry, that you put a dent in the ideology, you discredit the ideology, and you demoralize their followers globally. That would be the hope. Take out the caliphate and hope that the other dominoes fall around the world, because in the meantime, what they want to do is really turn Western cities into guerrilla war zones, where you're seeing an Orlando-style attack, Paris, Brussels-style attacks on a regular basis in Western cities. And if Western officials are correct, Terry, they are putting the foot soldiers in place to do exactly that.
Unbelievable. Eric Stakelbeck, thank you for being with us. I'm sure the rest of you share my thought that the question is, what are we waiting for?